You fought in Iraq with 4 tours under your belt and is now a managing partner at Digerati Investments. Welcome to the podcast, Paul.
Hey, thank you for having me, Joe.
Could you talk about your journey really from the beginning of being interested in VC to right now at Digerati Investments?
Yeah, absolutely. I decided to become an entrepreneur about 10 years ago in 2016, after spending several years in corporate and a decade in the Marine Corps. The things that I had experienced in both the Marine Corps and various organizations in corporate had me come to the realization that entrepreneurship could be a much better fit for my appetite for business. And so I took that leap. Over the years, I've had various founders approach me for help with fundraising, help with business development, et cetera. Being that my background is clearly focused on number one, networking, having have a strong network. And then number two, I have a business development and marketing background. And I think a lot of people saw that over time. And I began to kind of build a reputation for myself for delivering on results. And eventually I got introduced to a VC firm that was founded actually out of the Carnegie Mellon faculty department. So I got introduced to them. And from there, I've been in VC ever since. It was great. I worked for that firm pro bono. And then eventually they brought me in as a paid partner. And so I've done quite a bit of work in the VC and private equity space in different domains, whether it be robotics, artificial intelligence, fintech. I've even represented a real estate private equity firm. So I've gained exposure in various components of the capital markets, whether it be VC, PE, or alternative projects.
And how did that kind of turn into you being able to start the firm? What was truly the most transferable skills about VC from your time in maybe the military or the other projects that we did? Or was it truly because you kind of joined a VC firm and that was one of the biggest impacts that you were able to start this firm?
I think I was born to be a VC. I think it fits my nature and my personality. So it was just I could feel that it was a right fit. I think in terms of my transferable skills coming from the military is dealing with uncertain and ambiguous environments can be very mentally and emotionally challenging, I think, for a lot of people. And being a VC, you're definitely dealing kind of in those uncertain environments, so to speak. It's being in VC is kind of like the corporate epitome of war, so to speak. It's very competitive. It can get very sharky on, different deals and projects that, you could potentially be involved in. And there's also a lot of regulation, just like the military. VC is an industry with confines. So you're allowed to do XYZ as long as you don't go out of these confines. And the military is very similar. But within those confines, there's a lot of room for opportunity and there's a lot of room for creativity. You have to figure a way to, number one, being a VC is about supporting founders. So figure out a way to best support the founder community. And then number two, uh, figure out ways that we can innovate in the area of finance and bringing capital to great market opportunities, great founders. So, I think in terms of replicating maybe my experience from the military, I think between the military and corporate, where do I use my corporate experience most or do I use my military experience most? I have to say, hands down, the military, the Marines, and everything that they instilled in me and all of my good and bad experiences there. So with that being said, I think the biggest thing is when you're dealing in uh, deals within this space, the capital markets. There are so many moving parts, so it's kind of everything is not linear. It's very angular environment. It's kind of it can be very tough to um, have a plan that essentially comes to fruition. 95% of the time, it doesn't. And so when it doesn't, what are you going to do? You know what I mean? So the Marine Corps' model is adapt and overcome. The other thing that we have is weapons of opportunity, right? So everything can be a weapon to accomplish your mission. And in VC, you kind of have to think like that. Adapt and overcome when the situation doesn't go your way. And then number two, look for weapons of opportunity, or in this case, we'll just say tools and resources of opportunity to accomplish your mission, right? To drive the needle forward, drive that car forward. And I think if we think like that, and not in a narrow sense, but if we think with the broadest perspective possible and think in terms of combinations, not sequences, right? And so a lot of people think in sequence, if this, then that, and that's good to an extent. But we also need to think in terms of combinations, right? So not what do I have, and in what order can I employ what I have in terms of resources and tools, but also what do I not have that would be maybe a good combination or in terms of a tool or resource to accomplish my mission. So go outside of the box, in other words, is what I'm saying. And I've learned how to do that much better over the years. But I think those skill sets are critical for anybody who wants to play in this game of venture capital.
It sounds like VC is a battlefield, and it truly is a battlefield that you really excel in because you are able to maximize all the resources that you have in such a chaotic environment where it's like startups are changing, day by day, and you just don't know what actually pops up. But you also got to understand that, what is within the knowledge that you understand, what is
Yeah.
within your resources. You really just like take control of that and you make sure that that is aligned with what your mission is, but at the same time, you got to understand what is the out of the box stuff. What are the stuff that you don't know? And it sounds like you're able to balance this really well. Could you talk about like in this battlefield, like what is a day in your life? Go like 9 and then 10 a.m. or something that, and we talked earlier, you were doing a marathon, but what is a typical day in your life?
You know, Typical days are not typical. VC is very atypical. I will kind of explain if you've ever seen the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks. So he's flying on his plane, FedEx. The plane crashes. Everyone dies on board. So he's the only survivor. He finds this island. He's stuck there for 4 years. Everything that he did to survive there was ingenuity. Again, those tools and resources of opportunity, right? And eventually he said, if I want to do something, I'm going to die on this island. He built a raft, you know, and eventually got picked up by a ship. But that's kind of what VC is like when, every day is doing. I talked about a plan before. So we've got a plan. We're going to this destination. Boom, plane crashes. Like, I mean, that's kind of what, you've got these things that just come out of left field all the time. So, in terms of a typical day, it could be, well, I've got all these meetings on my calendar or then I have to shift meetings because, priority came up. For example, you know, generally speaking, I'll, get up in the morning and, I'll have a lot of business calls. I try to keep my business calls to the morning in in terms of speaking with new founders and whatnot. So I generally keep those in the morning, and then in the afternoons, I'm generally writing contracts, term sheets, things like that, conducting due diligence, maybe also following up via email on some things. I also keep my meetings with other VCs, co-investors. I try to keep those in the morning as well. So generally, it's wake up, have my coffee, get the meetings done. Probably like midday, I generally go for a workout. So I actually come back to the office refreshed and not drowned by monotony of the meetings I just had. And I start kind of getting into some doing that due diligence, writing the contracts, etc. From time to time, I do have interviews doing interviews, podcasts quite a bit. Additionally, I would say probably on like, Tuesdays and Fridays, Mondays, Tuesdays, and Fridays, I do a lot of research, um, which comes down to, a lot of that research that I do. I'll write about what I find, right? I'll write about my ideas. I've written for a number of online sources, publications, etc. I've got two to three, no, three AI communities that I'm a part of. One that I actually have a chapter in San Diego for called the AI Collective. So we've got chapters all across the country, but I run the chapter out of San Diego. So that's kind of, the typical. But then again, sometimes I'm throwing some curveballs and I get a lawyer from a letter or something like that. And I gotta do the dance with lawyers, which is probably like a part that I'm good at, but I don't really enjoy the most out of my job. It comes with the territory. So that would be about it. From time to time, I'm flying to have meetings across the country, et cetera. So like I'll be in Florida next week. I've got some meetings, business meetings that I'll be taking place in Florida. So
You seem like someone who's just puts everything into whatever you're doing. And that really comes from your military, experience where you were in Iraq, you were just fighting and you were in the battlefield. So is there a time where in a day, like where you just like let loose a little bit, then burnout doesn't hit? Like, does burnout ever happen for you?
I think that's an interesting question. You look at people like Warren Buffett. I think he's in his 80s. He's been doing what he's been doing all of his life, and he still does it because he loves it. He's not burnt out, So, um, most people want to retire about 30 years earlier than his current age, but I don't see myself doing it. I love what I do, both the good and the bad, and I'm excited to learn. I feel like there's so much more I can learn and do. And um, there's no room for getting burnt out. Either you love this or you don't. You know, um, do people do people get burnt out watching TV, playing video games? you know, but I know people that can do that all day, every day, and some people do, so it's all about, do you love what you do? I don't believe in getting burnt out. In terms of like
And
downtime, I try to do things that are going to reinvigorate me, not deplete me, so, doing a lot of drinking out on the weekends, going to bars, and that's not really a big thing for me. I try to do things like hiking, that gives me a sense of accomplishment. A few years ago, I hiked to the summit of El Capitan here in San Diego, about 4,000 feet up. I want to do Mount Whitney soon, which is like 14,000 feet. But I don't believe in coming into like a stagnant state of mind, so to speak. And I come back 100% every time. So that is my strategy. Again, I think if you don't love what you do, then and you need like breaks just to have breaks, then maybe it's not a good thing. You should wake up excited every day to do what you do. I think in hip hop they have this thing called "married to the game." So you gotta commit. It's a relationship. So that's how I view it.
in a way, VC really is truly similar to like Warren Buffett, where, we're making just a couple of deals every single year. And everything that comes along with that, it's learning about the industry, it's learning about startups, it's learning about society, it's learning about psychology. And you
Yeah.
do that by experiencing all of these type of things, just like how you hike in San Diego. It's all of the things that combine which you love doing, and that's the best part about it. And that's what make you kind of are, born for VC. So as a VC, you're looking at deals every single day and you're meeting those founders in the morning. What are the top three things that you look for in startups when you're deciding whether or not to invest?
The number one thing is, I've dealt with people from all walks of the world, from many different countries for many years, and I continue to meet. various individuals of certain types, from all walks of life every day. I'm interested in the founder's story. If I'm not inspired um, by their story, is this the right person to be, building this? Uh, if I don't feel like a sense of sincerity, it's something that you feel, in your skin, in your nervous system. You feel these things when you're talking with certain founders. I look less at the background, but I'm much more concerned with the type of individual that I'm dealing with, and what their leadership potential and capacity is, to grow. Um, I think lifestyle is an important question. What do they do outside of just building the business? What do they do? Do they have a bunch of obligations weighing them down, type of thing? What's their life like? And what are their viewpoints? I've been bootstrapping my own company for 10 years now. And when I became an entrepreneur, I purposefully sold my BMW, and, um, I trimmed the fat around my lifestyle, my cost of living. So I can live in a city, and I can pretty much walk everywhere from time to time, take an Uber, but I keep my costs down tremendously, right? Like, because I don't have a car payment, I don't have insurance I have to pay, I don't have car maintenance, I don't have gas that I have to pay. I mean, think about how much all that adds up. So things like that. Have they cut the fat, in their life? Um, as much as they can. Because I want founders to be able to build lean. It's not just about taking VC money, um, but actually build lean. I had a company that was raising like a million and a half. No, it wasn't. It was 500K. Um, they had like people just making exuberant salaries. I'm like, why? These are corporate salaries. Why is this in your projection? I had a company that was raising around 500,000, um, and they just had exuberant salaries in their projections. And I was trying to come to a point of understanding why they have corporate level salaries in there, you know. So, you can kind of, after a while dealing with a lot of different people, you can kind of, pick up on the signals. Most founders don't have really, most people in general actually have canned responses most of the time. Like, and once you've heard so many of them, like you've kind of heard them all. It is very rare that someone, like a founder, will come to me and ask me a question that completely, I've never heard that one before, right? So after you've heard them all, after you heard some of them, you've heard them all. So, I look at the founders. Number two, I probably look at the market opportunity as well. Does the market opportunity match the amount of, like, is this company VC potential, right? Like, if it's not a big enough market opportunity, this is not a growth company. It's not a VC company, right? They could maybe go get an angel investment or some debt capital. If they don't have the growth opportunity to match, so I'm talking about TAM, SAM analysis, right? Market analysis. If they don't have the growth opportunity to match what VCs want to do, the types of companies they want to put money in, then it's a no. And then again, is this the right team to take this to 25, 30x and on for multiple funding rounds? And then probably the third thing that I would say is what they're building, is it timely and relevant, and is it justifiable? So timely and relevant can mean, like, I'll use the Blockbuster Netflix example. Blockbuster was relevant for many years, and that's why they did very well. But when Netflix came along, they lost all, I would say they lost a bit of timeliness and relevance, right? Like, they lost relevance with their customer because they failed to adapt. And then they lost timeliness because they failed to adapt. They ran out of time and they went out of business. Right. So timeliness and relevance, are you actually building something that is, number one, relevant, and that's timely? I think those things are important. And is it justifiable? In other words, does the cost of the solution outweigh the problem, or is it, cheaper? So is the problem that they're solving big enough that people will actually pay for it? Generally speaking, you don't want to pay for something that's more than a problem. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like if you have a 20-year-old hoopty junk car, you're not going to go and put a $15,000 paint job on it. Like that's when the engine barely runs, right? And so looking at it in that perspective, and I'll just my last comment is I'll just hit on the timeliness and the relevance thing. Um, I had a gentleman approach me some years ago, um, but he wanted to extract water for $100 billion. I am not joking. For $100 billion a gallon from one of Uranus's moons. It's called Enceladus. Okay, that may very well be possible in a few decades. You know, especially as we continue along spatial exploration. We can barely even get to Mars. Uranus is like 100 million more miles away. So, where does that ever happen? Like, so it's not timely. It could be relevant in the future as we begin to have the water crisis, but especially in space, as we have people living on Mars, we're going to need water. But yeah, so things like that. So I don't see that fitting the VC window.
And VCs are risky too, but that type of risk is definitely out of the world. Really is comes down to those three things where it's like the founders is got to show their conviction through action.
Yeah.
Like, are they willing to cut the fat? And is this truly a real situation where you need a solution that is backed by the market? And
Mhm.
lastly, are you truly in the right timing for this? Because if you're not the right timing, there's probably like six, seven startups that have done it like every 3 years in the past, and they haven't succeeded. There's a reason why, and that's because it isn't the right timing. So, could you talk about maybe one story of your most successful investment so far? And how did you meet the founders and knew that they were the one?
Well, there's one company that I've been working with, and so I what they're doing is they're democratizing like the maritime environment, right? And so if you've ever spent any extensive amount of time in on the water, like in a boat, there's a lot of marinas and places across the US where it's very the maritime kind of environment, right? Like the waterways are very segmented in terms of access to things, right? Like so you can imagine, if you're 20 miles offshore, that's different than being like 20 miles in the middle of nowhere in a car. It's completely different. There's a lack of technical infrastructure within the kind of maritime environment, right? So, and that can be from alert systems in terms of weather changes, hazards in the water, emergency services, but also things like places to eat, where can we dock up at, et cetera, places to eat, places to go and shop, places to stay, et cetera. What they're building is kind of like it's a mix between kind of Uber and Waze for the water. So think Waze for the water. Maybe you've heard of Waze, which is a navigation system for vehicles on the road. But think of that for the water, kind of mixed with Uber. And maybe like I really like what they're doing. I love the founder. He checks all my boxes, so I've enjoyed working with them. And they're doing some great things for the military community as well. So, but I think that there is um, a really great opportunity there for for the private sector and the public sector. So I would consider
Yeah.
that a dual use opportunity.
Where did you meet the founder? Was it just like when you were traveling and then you guys just hit it off at a bar? What was that moment that you kind of met them? And like, why them besides like this amazing idea?
Because I feel like this particular founder is he's made some mistakes, I guess you could say, but he has a high aptitude and motivation and initiative to learn from those. That's one. In terms of where I met the founder, it was actually through our head of investor relations who had developed a relationship with him for over a period of several months before I ever even talked to him.
Yeah. And that's the core VC, where usually the founders that get invested in are the founders, who have some certain type of relationship. And it goes the other way as well, where it's like the founders doesn't have to take a certain VC's money, they can choose anyone. So that's why the VC also have to develop a really good relationship with the founder. So in terms of relationships, because it seems like you really truly built an amazing network over the years, how do you start relationships and also maintain those relationships with people who's more senior to?
So I think, in terms of starting relationships with people more senior to me, I think what is senior is a good question because I think that can mean a lot of different things. But I suppose I would consider senior as ultimately someone that you need something from, that you're trying to get something from. So yeah, that would be when you're the one doing the asking, you're kind of junior, you're taking on a beta role, So in terms of people that I might need some help from, um, again, maintaining those relationships, doing what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. If you can't do it, it's important to have communication and a good spirit of managing proper relationships. Otherwise, people lose faith in you, and um, eventually no one will come to your aid. And, we need people in this world that can do things for us so that we can go out and accomplish what we're trying to do and help other people so that we can do things for other people. I would say, how do I meet people? A lot of it, quite honestly, is through who knows who type of thing. Like I get introductions to other investors that are generally looking for me to talk about their deals and see if I can help out on their deals. So that's one thing, from time to time, I'll get introduced to people that are looking for opportunities to invest, maybe that I have as well. So just online introductions is a big thing. I do meet people from other like events and that I go to or communities that I'm involved in face to face as well. Like for example, I was just at a family office event in LA a couple days ago for an organization called Entrepreneur VC, who happens to be one of the people that I frequently look at deals with. So, Entrepreneur VC is a division of Entrepreneur Media and Entrepreneur Magazine. So, we've all heard of them. So, some great people over there. But yeah, yeah. And again, they actually reached out to me, and that's how I began the relationship. And I eventually met them face to face. So, just really good people there that I've really liked working with so far.
And that's usually how it works, it's like who introduces you to who, and then a warm intro is one of the best things. So after, let's say you do get that warm intro and you do get that meeting, right? Like what will you do at the end to maybe even have another meeting with that person, aka to like really maintain that relationship, even to make it into like a friendship? Would you just like say, "Hey, let's have another meeting every single month"? Like, does that work, or what do you do?
No, I wouldn't say that works. People are busy. Um, and it can't have meetings just for the sake of having meetings. But I think, on that first meeting, if you can get it kind of like a general idea for, what types of things are going to interest them, and then just kind of stay in those two lanes, in between those two lines on the lane. And from there, you'll have more things to talk about as time goes on. It won't be forced type of thing, right? But I think if you're busy and you actually have things going on, then I think, the communication level is going to be there regardless. So, as long as each party is kind of being upfront and transparent with like, hey, here's what I have, what I'm working on now. Here's what I'm interested in. Um, then I think the communication just happens naturally and you'll actually end up talking pretty frequently, but it's not something that has to be rigid or forced. Like, hey, let's have a once a month meeting. I think, if you get to a point where you're both stakeholders on a deal, I think that involves another level of communication that might require, a biweekly meeting or something like that, where you're meeting, every so often on a scheduled time.
Exactly. It's really just understanding, hey, this person's kind of upfront with me, and he says, I'm interested in so and so, and I'm working and so and so. So right after the meeting, if you encounters those interesting topics or people that that person is interested in possibly talking to or possibly learning about, just send it. Like literally just send it. And that is your conversation started.
Yeah.
And in terms of, I guess, let's say on the other side, right? Could you talk about one or two stories of people who you hired, maybe even VC interns? And what are the two things that they did that made you the most proud?
Interesting. I would say our head of investor relations, she's, I've gotten to see her kind of grow in her role over the past 2 or 3 years, and she just keeps going. So I would say that I'm proud of that because um, this industry is not. It's not for everyone. It's certainly not for the faint of heart. And I think a person a person is really growing. It's clear that they're growing in their role, that they're progressing when I start learning more things from them, right? I'm teaching them, maybe onboarding them, kind of teaching them the ropes of the industry, maybe at first, but um, once they're in, once they're out the gate and on the saddle, they're riding bulls, so to speak, and they're going through things that are helping them develop their own perspective, unique perspective, and from there, they're able to kind of teach me things that even I never knew, or that in ways that I never thought about things. So I'd say when that happens, is a leader, I've hope I think I've done my job. Because ultimately at the end of the day, as leaders, our job is to build other leaders, So um when I see that in action, it tells me like, okay, so this is the right person for this, and this is the person that is they're an emerging leader in this space. And from there, and I don't look at it as necessarily a senior or junior thing. I look at it as, okay, now eventually we're kind of learning, kind of like a parent and a child. It goes from child to adult. Well, now we're two adults. Yes, child and parent, but in actuality, we're two adults that have lived, maybe if the parent is 20 years older or 60 and the child is 40, at that point we've both lived full lives, and so we can actually both teach each other things. And that's kind of how I view um working with new individuals and kind of fostering their growth.
And when they truly grow into someone who, just tells you their perspective that you've never thought about, that is a true partner. It
Yeah,
is someone
absolutely.
who's really turned from, like, maybe like you said, a child and a parent into friends, perhaps, where it's like they tell you stuff that you never known before, and you also share that, and you guys go back and forth, and that is how the best investments are made. That's how the best ideas are formed. And for aspiring VCs too, like literally just do this, as in investors don't know everything. So how about your superpower? What would you say your superpower is? Is it getting secondaries? Is it from your experience in connecting two people together? Is it portfolio help? What is your superpower in the VC industry?
I think my superpower, and maybe this will change at some point, but as of today, the VC industry is in a state of fluctuation right now. Um, we're kind of in that, we're kind of in this kind of purgatory, so to speak, between the new VC world and the old VC world. And so out with the old, in with the new. And, I think right now my superpower has been just being a responder to that, and, creating, generating new schools of thought, breaking away from the traditional norm of VC and thinking in different paths and avenues that can uh, can work for today's founders and today's limited partners, because the VC is nothing by itself. The VC is nothing by itself in that, like, if you don't have founders, it doesn't matter, and if you don't have institutional capital or limited partners, then it also doesn't matter. So you got to have both ends of the bread, to make the sandwich, right? To encompass the burger patty. But you know that burger patty is how each VC is structured. Some all burger patties are cooked differently. So some are well seasoned, some are medium rare, some are well done, etc. Even though the industry is highly regulated, I think we'll all agree that the current burger patty is rotten. And so we need a whole new burger patty, because right now the LPs and the founders are saying, you know, this thing is like jacked up, especially the LPs, which is why you have less LPs funding early stage VCs. They're moving their money into more established firms. And really, early stage VC is where the best returns are made. But over the past several years, with COVID, and VCs were dumping money into companies and skyrocketing valuations. That has turned off, a lot of people, a lot of LPs, and so you know, uh, a lot of VCs. You can look this up, but they've just failed to return capital. The performance is abysmal. Well, it's pretty obvious that we got to do something different.
Yeah, and it's so, so true that early stage VCs is where the true value is made, especially right now, where it's like companies can just stay private and just never take money again after maybe even the C stage. So if you think about that, it's like the only people who's ever going to get an investment in could be these early stage VCs. Personally, your fund funds companies that partners with the public and private sector. So this is really at the gov and policy level where it's like it's hard to break in. It's really restrictions and there's guidelines that you have to follow and stuff like that. In a way, would you say that by the LPs, they want value at the end, right? They just want the IRR. So would you say that the fund model of ventures should change? Or is it just that the bad VCs should just like get out of the game and then the good VCs should stay and those good VCs should have new and better ideas?
I think we can still have limited partners, but I do think the traditional 80-20 10-year fund is kind of dead. I think convertible, or rather credit facilities, and doing a kind of more of a deal by deal type basis with a smaller portion of capital, and then structuring that in a way that says, hey, you know, we've got a lot of convertible notes here, or convertible debt, or we've set up SPVs, and we're making money like that, right? But a small amount of credit facility capital to the VC, and then, cash in real time. You know what I mean? So that fund life cycle is shortened to something like, 4 to 5 years. And when there's plenty of money in that for the GPs, when you can take management fees off of SPVs, and you can take interest payments on convertible debt, etc. So I think that it decreases some of the risk upfront for founders as well, where they're not getting their cap table blown up early on. And, they've got a small amount of debt, and you can always go debt versus equity first, you know, sell someone on your vision. You know what I mean? If the company is in a bad state with the debt. But if you get in a bad state on unsubordinated or non-subordinated debt, or I'm sorry, non-subordinated equity, if you get in a bad state with equity, non-subordinated equity, because LPs and investors will generally want that, their money back first. They want preferred returns. That's what this thing is about, right? And so no debt lender will take you on at that point. You're not going to sell a debt lender on your dream, but you'll sell an equity investor on your dream. So, going debt and then to equity, can be a smooth move that helps decrease some of the upfront risk for founders and, LPs and GPs alike. And then you build from there, right? You take some of those SPVs fees, the management fees, the interest in full, and you write small checks, you build, but you recycle some of it, until it keeps growing. And then pretty soon you've got a strong portfolio. It's not going to be necessarily the X or whatever. I'm not saying that we can't do those deals when it's a sure bet. Like we know this thing is going to 30X, you can still do those deals, but the majority of deals aren't like that. And that's why the portfolios fail. So I think we can do it with a sense of humility and, with a sense of uh, frugality to it. And then on an occasion when we get those deals that are performing that well, we can always convert from debt to equity, and we can pour multiple cash lines on top, of that. When we've got a company that's on track to do 25, 30X, we can do that. But we need the discretion ability, and the ability to shift gears to do that. See, if you're already on the cap table, you're locked in. You know what I mean? So that's what I talked about, like thinking about it like that, in non-traditional terms versus like how the industry has trained you to think about it. Cause that's not how the industry works. The industry has changed. And not only that, just to your point, some founders may never want to take cash again. Why would they take cash if they don't need to? Why would they give up a huge percentage of their company if they don't need to? I mean, you would have to make like tens of millions of dollars. Like it would have to be life-changing money for you to give up that much of your company, and then exit, but most companies aren't going to exit at like tens of millions of dollars. So, but if you give up too much of the cap table, then you've thrown that away. You've thrown it away. And now you've built this company and you have nothing because you got greedy too early on. That's just like, to cut it short, simple, and dry. You got greedy too early on, and you were ambitious. You were overly ambitious about something that's hypothetical. So let's talk about real cash, real time distributions paid in, not, futuristic projections, because we don't know what's going to happen.
And that's the whole point. If you truly just reduce the amount of risk early
Hmm.
on, and then, just like you said, 4 to 5 years, this is kind of what Lightspeed is also doing a little bit of 4 to 5 years. And then you try to return that money back to that investor and you just keep doing that. So the the literally 3 times that you do that instead of waiting 15 years, you can probably have the exact same amount of money returned as a unicorn. But at the same time, even better because you're making these, investors, these LPs even happier because you're just returning money every, short 4 to 5 years. And they're just like, oh my gosh, that's money. And then
Yeah.
they put it back into your fund, or they could do a bunch more structures and everyone is and I see this future, man. Like this is so accurate and it is gonna happen. I'm so happy to see how it's gonna play out. So I know you talked a little bit about how to break into VC. For our viewers who needs an actionable plan, let's say it's a theoretical plan. What would be your recommended 6 month plan to fully break into VC for a member of the US military? And then please say like month 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah. So, I would say, first off, before I go to the steps, first off, coming out of the military is a very I've used this analogy before, but essentially it's like you're on planet Earth, where you have all this structure, this ecosystem, you know what to expect. Sun's gonna rise, sun's gonna set, you know, you know what the environment's like. That's what the military is like. you know but when you leave the military, it's like going on a rocket ship. It's like going on a rocket ship outside of Earth, and you do it fast. But when you come into the military, it's a gradual process, just like when we're born on Earth. You're not thrown into the world and expect to figure it out. Like, you have parents, they gradually involve you in the world, so um but that's kind of like what going into the military is like, is you have this process. They gradually involves you into the military world, and you get adapted to that, right? But leaving the military world it's like a transition out. There's no adaptation process, right? To leaving planet Earth and going to another solar system or another planet. You just gotta figure it out and get used to it, right? And on that journey, a lot of things can happen. Sometimes you get hit with an asteroid, all sorts of stuff, right? Just like out of nowhere. And so then what are you going to do, right? And so, um, I would say just kind of keep it, being a military member, keep that kind of that resourceful mindset. We're going to figure this thing out. I'm going to figure this thing out. If I'm behind enemy lines and I don't know what's going to happen. I'm alone behind enemy lines. I have to use my training, and I have to figure this thing out, right? To take one step at a time, from step one to step two to step three, but not from step one to step three, but one step at a time. So first off, engineer your mind like that. In terms of coming a 6-month plan and coming into the VC world from the military, understand that VC is generally not a job. It's not something you can apply to. Yes, there's job applications online, of course, but generally speaking, VC is not like a regular company where they might have hiring sprees. If a fund, let's say a $50 million fund, or let's say a $60 million fund. So $60 million fund, after all management fees are paid out. So you've got $12 million, say, for example, in management fees over the course of 10 years. Those fees go to fund expenses. And this is just for one fund. They go to fund expenses and salaries and legal fees, accounting fees, things like that. And that's it. That's all you have to give out to the team and support the fund's livelihood. The remaining $48 million will be deployable capital to founders. So, you think, like, for a fund, there's not a lot of wiggle room there, right? To just hire people. Generally when you start the fund and LPs want to see this, founders want to see it, but they don't get too happy when they see a lot of turnover. So the team that you got when you start the fund is pretty much the team you stick with. And there's very little change that happens there. um from time to time, you'll just have someone, their life takes a different direction. Okay, we gotta either let that person go or they had to leave, but we gotta find a replacement. But that's very infrequent, so to speak. That's a rare type of situation. So I say all that to say, the average company, you talk about high growth companies, they may be hiring for 10 jobs one year, 20 the next, and so forth. So there's a lot of room to apply and compete. A VC is not like that. VC is also a very abstract skill set. I think our listeners probably picked up on that it's a very abstract skill set. There's no course or college that can really, to me, there's no course, college, or book. I've read books on VC. It'll open up your minds to different ways of thought. But all in all, there's no course or college that you can really take and sit in a classroom. You got to get out there and start doing stuff. You got to learn how to write contracts, how to write term sheets, how to navigate SEC and FINRA laws. You got to study on that on your own, and nobody has the time to teach you. It's a very self-driven industry, right? GPs are busy, principals at VC funds are busy. So if you're trying to get into VC, you need to learn this stuff on your own. you can start with step one, uh, saving your money, because it's expensive to get into VC. Just to set up my credit facilities and escrow accounts, et cetera. Um, you know, it cost me, around 350 to 400,000 just to do that. So if you don't have that money laying around, well, number one, save. Number two, think about how you're going to get it, to do that. Um, and you should be scrappy on, uh, how you're going to get the money to do that, right? Like, do you just already make that kind of money, or like, do you have to engineer some kind of business, some kind of business plan to generate that kind of capital? For me, I had to engineer a business plan to make that kind of capital in the first place. Save your money, make money, because setting up a VC firm on your own is really, really, really tough to do. If for some reason you're not able to afford to set up a VC firm on your own, there's a couple of different other paths. You could do micro investments, 5,000, 10,000 here, 15,000 here, and watch those grow over time. Wouldn't recommend, I personally wouldn't recommend, I mean, you can do this, but if you're going to make an angel investment for like $10,000, don't take equity on the cap table. The 10,000 is gone. Do a reasonable, promissory note that doesn't, evade, usury laws. It talked about like 8% return, or if you got to go above usury laws, use North Carolina maybe as your state of domicile, because they, on business to business transactions, they don't have a cap on usury laws. But also don't like take advantage of the founder. It's $10,000. Don't be looking for like, 100x return or something ridiculous, right? Like maybe 15% return, over the course of 6 to 12 months or something like that. I might even go a little bit higher than that. I want to make some money here. I might look for something like 50% return, over the course of a year. 50%, what? I made $5,000 on 10. So that's not too bad, over the course of a year. You do enough of those, some are going to pan out, some aren't. Just make sure you have a nice clauses in your agreement that says, hey, if I don't get this amount of money back, then I can have these recourses. You know what I mean? So they can be equity as cash. There can be a bunch of different recourses that says, hey, I have first right of refusal towards any profits that come into the company. So that's another way. So that's kind of like step 1A. So I went step one, save your money, make money. Step 1A is maybe do some angel investments. Now, step 1B would be to, network like you never had friends. Uh, Networking, this business is about relationships more than finance. So, if people, and you've developed those relationships over time, and you put yourself into situations where you can demonstrate your knowledge, and also, your reach. Like, the number one thing that VCs need are like deal flow, great deal flow, and then unique ways of, dealing with challenging situations, and then number three, access to capital. We need those things. So network like crazy, like you never had any friends, with great founders, and make sure you're taking challenges head on, because those are going to give you the experiences that are going to make you freaking sharp as an edge in VC. And then, networking with, what was the third thing? So yeah, networking, with essentially people that have capital. So capital sources, right? So deal flow pipeline, taking challenges head on, and then, capital sources, are going to help you kind of get into the space. Let's see. A number, this is kind of like number three, but the other thing I would say is, learn a lot in terms of legal and regulatory practices. You got to know what these clauses and the term sheets and the closing documents say, what they mean. You can't pay a lawyer to figure this out for you every time. That's another thing that drives me nuts with founders. Like, the first thing they get a term sheet or an agreement, they see a bunch of language they don't understand, they want to go to a lawyer. Like I've been drafting my contracts forever. I generally don't pay lawyers until I have to. Not because I have a contract that I don't understand, but I research what it means and I get my own perception of what the language means. And now we have ChatGPT. There's no excuse to be shelling out thousands of dollars of legal fees until you're like at the line where big money is about to transact. Okay, then yes. But for term sheets, NDAs, and things like that, NDAs are non-binding, generally speaking. So until you're at the closing document stage, you're transmitting your shareholder agreements, and you're about to shake hands on this, yeah, then have a lawyer review. Absolutely. And just make sure that if, because I've had a lot of lawyers that just didn't do their freaking jobs, make sure that that lawyer is liable. If they miss anything, you need to figure out a way. Make sure in your agreement with your lawyer that they are liable. If they've missed anything that's going to hang you up, you know what I mean? That's going to box you in because they were incompetent. So yeah, I mean, if you're paying like $1,000 an hour for a lawyer, you better do your job. The lawyer better do their job. So again, learn all about SEC, how VC firms are regulated. If you're a 506B firm, you can't solicit. You can't do it. So learn about it. It's going to get you in trouble if you ever get audited. Learn about fraud. What constitutes fraud? It's breach of agreements. What do certain terms mean in a contract? Like what's a DACA agreement? What's drag along rights, preferred rights, liquidation preferences, et cetera. Learn about those things and how they protect you. And that's going back to like what's a red flag for founders. Like that's probably another thing is like a founder that approaches me. Number one, I don't know who they are, so they're soliciting me. That's number one. Number two, they don't they don't understand like if I ask them about certain clauses in the agreement, they don't understand like what it is, and then if they just give me like stupid answers, like I asked one founder, I'm like, so why didn't you do a safe note instead of a convertible note? Oh, because it was the easiest and the cheapest thing to do. Well, that's not an answer, man. You're talking about your company and other people's money. So because it's easy and cheap, no, man, we're going to be this is going to be a long ride. Things like that. Look out for things like that. Uh, but yeah, that's pretty much what I would do. If I was a veteran transitioning out of the military, and if you don't have any combat experience and study up on the art of war, and kind of what that mentality is like, and dealing with fear and ambiguity. Because I would say, I've got 4 combat tours, but I would say being a VC is probably the closest civilian thing that I could compare to wartime. Um, it's still nothing like it. Like being a young Marine in combat, nothing like it. But there are some there are some aspects of being in VC that are like, wow, I've seen this movie before. So those would be my suggestions.
And that's why you're born for it, man. That was amazing, Paul. For
Yeah,
anyone
you bet.
listening who wants to learn more about you or your firm, what is the best place to reach you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Paul Anthony Claxton on LinkedIn with that. That's a VC. So last name is spelled CLAX is in X-ray, TON is in November. You can also find me on my personal curriculum vitae site, paulclaxton.io.
And you have a podcast too, right?
Yeah, I do. It's called Explainable AI. That podcast is hosted on Spotify and iTunes under an organization called the AI Alliance Accelerator Institute.
Awesome. And I'll put all his contact details and informations in the description below. Out of everyone you know, who are 2 amazing VCs that you will recommend as future guests to our podcast?
I really like Jonathan Hung at Entrepreneur VC. He's out in LA. The other one that I really like is, sorry, I'm thinking here because I want to make sure that I give you a really, really a good answer here in terms of like who I would recommend. Give me a moment. So we've got Jonathan Hong, and I would say, see, I know a lot of angels, but I'm thinking of like VCs that I highly recommend. I would say if you're a veteran, I think this is befitting. Take a look at Darren Burrell. I like that guy. He's over at Veteran Ventures. So they specifically kind of focus on veterans, investing in veteran-led companies, et cetera. Yeah. So, and I think that's relevant since we talked a lot about the military here.
Thank you again, and thanks to everyone who's listening. Comment a question you want to hear from our next guest. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to press the subscribe button, like, and share it with someone who's interested in getting into venture. We'll see you next time. I'm Breaking the VC.